I'm Rim.
I'm Scott.
We are the hosts of GeekNights. It is a podcast. If you enjoy anything that happens in the next hour in this room, well, you're in luck. There are literally thousands of hours of us talking on the internet because we've been podcasting since 2005 continuously. This is like our 480th something panel at a convention, and we're here today to talk about games you can't play. Because in the history of humans, in the world, there are some age-old problems. There are themes that just recur over and over and over again. I want to play D&D, but my D&D group has fallen into drama. Whatever thing in my game that is the equivalent of the AWP from Counter-Strike is OP and it needs to be nerfed, and I'm really mad about it. Looking at you, the blob, who was recently nerfed. Some dipshit sold me the wrong copper. And I want to play a game, but I am unable to play that game. Mm-hmm. It's really hard sometimes to play a game, even a game you want to play. But it's hard enough to find someone to play a game with, even if it's a game that's popular. It's at a convention. You're at a convention. There's big cones saying LFG. There are people who struggle to find someone to play a game at like the densest gaming environments on Earth. But what if we made it even harder? What if it's a game that requires specialized equipment? What if it's a game that just doesn't exist anymore? The rules are lost. What if it's a game where every time you try to play it, the police shows up? Remember that, because the police show up if you play a certain kind of game. Mm-hmm. Actually, two of the games we talk about in this panel. But even then, that's not insurmountable. I mean, there's a museum here. We could play Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles on original hardware if we wanted. We have a little basket.
I'm sure there is enough equipment to do that at MAGFest somewhere.
But what if it's actually almost impossible? What if the game you want to play is like Tribes 2?
Any Tribes 2 players? Yeah. Okay, so Tribes 2 was a game that you could play back in the day, but they made a grave mistake, right? And that there was a centralized server instead of, community servers like all the other games were doing at the time. And that server is long gone. And the game was patched and unpatched 100,000 times, and no one knows what version, and it's not like we have the source code or anything.
Yep.
So it's like there is technically a way that you can do it, but it is so difficult to make it work. It is so janky. It's like, it's really not going to happen.
It's download an EXE from some guy and trust it.
Yeah.
What if it's the BattleTech pods, which used to be here every year, and they're not?
It was not every year. It was a few years in a row.
For many years, there would be BattleTech pods just at MAGFest.
They're not here. Anyone see them at this MAGFest? No, I didn't see them. No. Yeah.
What if the game you want to play is the Quake arcade game?
What?
So I learned that this game existed in the course of doing research for this panel. Yes, there was a Quake arcade game. We'll talk about if you can play it or not. But also, what if it's actually impossible? What if it's not a matter of you just have to find the guy, you have to do the research, you get together the team and put the game back together at MAGFest and put it in the museum? What if it's a game, that's a game from ancient times where the rules are actually lost? Because it turns out a game can actually go extinct. Not just obscure, not just lost, but gone. Gone forever.
You could come up with rules to a game that uses this board and these pieces, and there is a non-zero chance you come up with the exact same rules as the ancient peoples, but you would never know if you did or didn't, right? So you could never confirm if you're actually playing the ancient game of or whatever you came up with.
So what we want to do in this panel is we're going to try something a little different from usual games preservations panels.
Because we're not actual game preservation people.
Yeah, we're talking professionals, not most other kinds of professionals. We want to apply the IUCN Red List criteria to games.
So if you don't know what this is, it's basically the organization that determines how endangered different species are, right? There's very extinct, right? Completely extinct. There are no more dodo birds that are alive unless you do a Jurassic Park situation, right? And on the other end, there isn't totally fine, no worries whatsoever. There's least concern, right? Because as we are well aware, even humanity is in danger of extinction to a non-0% chance, right?
Yeah, things that are least concern are, like, the only things that are no concern are things like stars.
Right.
Stars got a while to go.
Right, least concern is like cockroach. It's like, we always talk about how, cockroaches will still be around. They probably will be, but it's like, it's still possible that all the there could be some cockroach disease that spreads across the earth and wipes them out. It could happen, right?
But any game, even the most popular game in the world, Fortnite's gonna disappear one day. Not can, it will. It is going to disappear.
But you think about a game that's so unendangered. Mario 3, least concern.
Yep.
Right?
But we're gonna try to apply this to games, but you have to really understand, we are not preservation specialists. I'm not a scientist. I'm like an IT guy who became a product manager and does a podcast.
We're here to get a free badge. That's what we're here for.
But also, there are interesting criteria. The IUCN list can't just be straight applied to games because there are two different fundamental avenues that threaten games that do not have they do not threaten animals and plants the same way. The difference between a game that is unable to be played versus a game that theoretically could be played but nobody will play.
You could find, at PAX, there's this Alexandria tabletop library, and they have a huge collection of old tabletop RPGs, right? And it's like, they have the books, they're there, right? But to actually play any of those games as they are written in those rule books, you would need to acquire people who will dedicate an inordinate amount of time to reading those books, understanding them, and then to actually play the games takes another inordinate amount of time, way more time than you have even if you dedicated your entire convention to it and everyone is prepared, right? So it's like, yes, you could play this game, but nobody on Earth is playing that game.
Yep. I've got the book to Shadowrun 2nd Edition. I doubt I could find enough people to run a campaign of Shadowrun 2nd Edition. So let's go through this list. Let's start talking about different kinds of games and what are the criteria we could apply and examples of games that would fit into these categories. We'll start with least concern. If you got the hammer suit, you're sitting pretty. You're pretty well equipped to defeat Bowser. Tabletop games are definitely some of the least concern because, if nothing else, as long as the concept of cards exists, you can make a card, and as long as you know the rules, any tabletop game can be recreated perfectly. The rules are the code, effectively.
You might think about some crazy tabletop games out there that have, all sorts of wild equipment, and as long as it's not a dexterity kind of game with flicking pieces or something, or like a Jenga, you can recreate it entirely with cards. You can play, if you want to play chess, we could play chess entirely with nothing but cards. We make a board out of cards. We make a card for each piece. Boom, we can play chess.
Yep.
Right? Oh, you need dice? We don't have any dice? Well, that doesn't matter. We can play Monopoly anyway. I'll take 6 cards and another 6 cards, and you shuffle one pile, you draw a card. You shuffle the other pile, draw a card. Boom, 2d6, done. Right? Every single tabletop game that isn't some sort of dexterity game or sport or something like that can be completely recreated with cards. Every game's a card game.
Yep. So tabletop games are definitely least concern. They are the easiest to preserve. They are very well preserved because all you really need is a file that has the rules in it. You're good to go.
And the ability to make cards.
Yes. I guess theoretically you could recreate the game in VR and it would be the equivalent. Well,
Sure.
I can see a future we could make VR, but we can't make cards.
Like run out of trees and paper entirely? I guess so.
Yeah. All our brains are connected to some kind of matrix.
No more ink no longer exists. You can't use your own blood either for some reason.
Quake. Quake is there are very few video games that I would consider least concern. And Quake is an interesting case because very recently...
Also Doom.
Yes, Doom,
Same category.
Quake.
Yeah.
These are games that this company, id, one of the first major game companies that people would recognize in this room, unless you're really old and you know what Sierra is, not only is Quake very well preserved via emulation, via recreations, via piracy, via people taking it and modding it, via lots of people who just own the game in various media.
Via lots of the source code being just open.
Yep.
Doom, actually, the Doom source code's been legally available for a long time, but it was always available under like this weird license. Just like that last week, they switched the Doom source code to the GPL license.
Yep. So you could compile.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could compile Doom.
Okay.
But,
it doesn't include the WAD files still, though. It's just the engine, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But Quake got recent updates. You can go into Steam today and just play Quake, including multiplayer with other people, and it just works, and it's the same game, but even better. They patched it. They fixed a couple of bugs and cleaned up some stuff. It's not like a new remaster of Quake came out in the year 2023. It's just, yeah, Quake, the original one, has a slightly newer version, which is kind of amazing. No other game company has had that level of dedication to making a game available.
Yeah.
It is like above and beyond in this regard.
Yeah, the vast majority of video games out there are software. They're all software, and they require some specific hardware that will run them, right? You know, you can emulate, you can do other tricks, but you know, are you really preserving it then? A lot of questions. We'll talk about that later, right? But Quake, Doom, these programs are famous for being able to run on a vast array of computers, right? Little clicky phones, the flippy ones, basically anything. If it has a CPU, it can run this code. And so they are not so endangered.
But the most important thing about why Quake fits into least concern, and basically Zed Games in general, is just that the company has demonstrated over decades, and video games aren't that old, like a significant percentage of the history of video games on Earth has had this company continuing to maintain this game.
Yeah, video games were invented in 70s-ish,
Yeah.
right? And these games came out 90s-ish, and it's now 2020, so it's been there for the majority of that time.
I don't think Epic Games is going to take Fortnite to that level, but Quake is definitely taken to that level.
Okay.
All right, let's get into a little more interesting case. Let's actually talk about Fortnite, because Fortnite, possibly the most popular video game in America right now, maybe the world, it's not a least concern game. It is definitely near threatened. So let's talk about why. We did another panel at this con where we talked about can competitive and casual coexist? The answer is no. And this came up in the context of Fortnite changed the game and then changed it back. And there's a whole story there. But they changed the game and changed it back. You can't play that old Fortnite. You can't play old versions of Fortnite. Fortnite's more like online entertainment software. You get whatever's in the app at any given time. How many games is Fortnite? Every time the rule set changed a lot, then you could argue that's a completely different game.
Yeah,
and it's lost.
I would actually argue that. I would say that a game is defined by its rules. If you change even one rule a little bit, you might call the game the same name just because it would be really hard. Like, they changed the rules of baseball recently to where it's like there's a pitch clock now, right? It's like we still call it baseball, but it's like, in my eyes, if you're really getting specific, that is now a different game, right?
It's baseball 3.6.
It's baseball with pitch clock, right? Right? And so, you can play baseball, obviously, right? You just find 9 people who are willing to play, 18 people who are willing to play, and you can play baseball. And as long as you got a bat, a ball, and a field, you're good in gloves.
Make a bat out of cards.
Right.
Make gloves out of cards.
It's obviously not a dead game, right? And you can play baseball by any rule set that has ever existed, right? But can you play baseball? The field matters in baseball, right? It's like, you can't play Shea Stadium baseball anymore. It's gone, right? The field was different shape. It's not the same as playing in a different field, right? You can't play Major League Baseball, I guess, because you're not a Major League Baseball player, but you can't play Major League Baseball sans pitch clock. That game will never be played again. And so every time Fortnite changes versions, it's like, yeah, you can still play Fortnite extremely easily. It's free. Your phone will play it, right?
Yep.
Well, not an iPhone, but but the other versions are gone. You cannot play the old Fortnite anymore, right?
But also, Fortnite is monetized differently from Quake. Quake is one of those ancient kinds of software where you pay money and you receive game. It's weird, but that's how games used to be sold. Fortnite makes money by tricking kids into clicking a serotonin button to get a skin or whatever.
Isn't that better? You don't even pay money. You just receive game.
You pay with your soul.
Yeah.
But that means when the money dries up, Fortnite disappears really fast. If Epic Games stops making money and doesn't do well, Fortnite's gone.
Well, because it's dependent on these central servers that must continue to exist and which you cannot run yourself.
And also, Fortnite is made by a newer company. They haven't been around as long. They have not demonstrated to us the level of custodianship and care that id has demonstrated with their games.
Epic is still pretty just about as old, but they have not.
But they have
not demonstrated the care.
Yeah, not all these versions of Unreal are playable. There's a lot of games they have just dropped.
The Unreal Tournament is not GPL the way the Doom is.
id has proven to us they care. Epic has not proven to us they care about this.
Or there are other games.
All right. What about a vulnerable game? Now, I want to use a very specific example here so we can walk through it. Anyone play Counter-Strike?
Yeah.
That's not the example. The example is a game called Action Quake 2. Action Quake 2 is the game that Counter-Strike is based on. Action Quake 2 is actually the game that Overwatch is also based on. They said as much in multiple interviews. Has anyone played Action Quake 2?
Right, the one person, well, we have. Right. Yeah. This is a mod for Quake 2, right? So it's like, yeah, Quake 2 is very well preserved, right? But getting this mod, right, is a little difficult, especially getting it to work, right? It doesn't always work with every version of Quake 2. And then even if you get it to work, it's like you need to get other people to get it to work because it's a multiplayer game. And then you need to network properly somehow with the old ways of networking.
Yep.
Right? It's like, it's not easy to get a game of Action Quake 2. To get a game of Action Quake 2, you'll probably need to go to like the MAGFest Museum multiplayer zone in the middle, which wasn't even working till like, right? It's like, that's how hard it is to get this kind of game going.
And while id has preserved Quake 2, like Quake 2 got the same updates that Quake 1 did, and it's great. That multiplayer is fantastic. The old mods don't work with that for library reasons that are beyond the scope of this panel.
Some of them do, some of them don't.
Most of them don't.
Yeah.
There's a 32, 64-bit problem, and there's some other problems. So it is very hard to play Action Quake 2. However, someone has released a game that is not called Action Quake 2, but basically they have cobbled together a game that plays 95% the same as Action Quake 2, and they have put it on Steam as free to play. And if you go play it, if you click on this game, there's a bunch of people playing this game. I played Action Quake 2-ish a whole bunch of times before this panel.
And despite the fact all the stuff we talked about, how hard it is to get the original game to run, it's like, well, the code is still out there. The files are still out there. You can just download them if you search for them. It's possible. If someone who was really computery worked really hard on it, they could make it go.
But the fact that there is a community of a few hundred people keeping that game alive, running regular tournaments, they have a Discord server, that community and the fact that that bastardized version exists on Steam means this game is only vulnerable to extinction. There are people who, if it becomes more likely to be extinct, they may fight, they may try to save it, they may do something. But at the same time, it is vulnerable, and I don't think it's going to be around when I'm 80. I just have a suspicion.
I don't know.
So in this middle area, this threatened area, this is where we can't take the specific criteria that are used for animals and apply them to games because games are such different beasts. So we want to take a moment to talk about what are the specific factors that can threaten a game as opposed to an animal or a plant or a microbe or something. Central dependence, just like with Fortnite, with MMOs. If there's a server that the game needs and that server goes away, you probably can't play the game. Mm-hmm. That puts a game at risk.
Right, and this doesn't always just apply to video games. This can apply to all sorts of other games. If there, you might have a game that you can play, but a tournament of that game is actually a more specific game, and if there might be an organizing body of some sort. So this game can only happen when this organization is operating and running the game. You might think about something like, I don't know, D&D Adventurers League, right? It's like there's people who like run that thing and come up with all these. If those people go away, it's like obviously you can still play D&D, but you can't play D&D Adventurers League without that governing body that's like organizing all that stuff all the time, right? Someone would have to make a new organization, which would technically be something different.
So we're at MAGFest, so usually at PAX's people kind of go, ooh, but you've all seen this. That game, that's a cool game. It's over there in the arcade. If you want to play that game, you got to have that thing.
You either have to be the person who made it. I don't know who they are. Are they in this room? No, they're at this MAGFest somewhere because they haven't taken it home yet.
That's been at MAGFest for at least a decade.
But all of us who are able to come to MAGFest, the sold-out event, are privileged enough to be able to play this game, and we are the only people, basically, who can play that game unless that person who made it takes it to some other convention or you go to their house or something, and that's it. No one else on Earth can play this game, and if for some reason that person something happens to them or they run out of money or they have to sell this or it breaks and they don't feel like fixing it, that's the end.
Someday, the last Steel Battalion controller will cease to function. Someday, the last Cobalt Flux DDR pad won't work anymore and the company's gone. But socially dependent games. This is an interesting one. That's our D&D group playing on the roof of my apartment building. We live in New York. But that's a really old picture, too. Goddamn.
Katsu is still there. I haven't seen Katsu in a long time.
But that's
if anyone sees Katsu, contact us immediately. That's what he looks like on the left.
These are games that require other people to be able to play them. Now, there's two ways these threaten games. On one hand, if the community is so small, you will not find people to play the game with anymore. But two, if you need to find someone to play the game with, now you have to worry about personal social compatibility. There's a lot of people who will play D&D. You don't want to play D&D with a lot of those people. I see a lot of people nodding. We've all experienced this. That guy is a gender-neutral term that refers to a very specific kind of person.
But it's like, everyone's like nodding, like, yeah, there's a lot of people I don't want to play with. Yeah, each one of you who is nodding, the person to the left of you who is also nodding is the person you don't want to play with, right? None of you want to play with each other, even though there's enough people in this room who are nodding to make like 5 campaigns, right? None of them will happen. None of you are compatible. It's like awful.
But a game that requires multiple people to play, a game that is social or socially competitive, those games, it's just like double difficulty because it's very easy to lose those human connections, and then the game doesn't have the momentum to continue, even though you've got all the source code, all the rules, everything. There's a bigger area around community-dependent games. Think about Smash Brothers, old Smash Brothers. Would that be the same game if there wasn't that level of community driving it? The experience of playing like old Smash Brothers in a tournament, and there's 100 people behind you who know exactly how that game works and cheer at the weird points in the game that only super nerds know about, that know about port priority and understand that that's a factor. That community is keeping that game alive, but I would argue that that game only exists in the context of that community. Smash Brothers in the modern competitive scene is not the same game as Smash Brothers when it came out, whenever the N64 came out, when I was in high school. So, some games, you need some money to play them.
Right. Now, you think about something like, I don't know, polo with horses, right? It's like, yeah, there are people on Earth playing polo with horses. It's not us. Oh, I guess, make sure it's not us, right? No one here is polo rich? No polo rich people?
We're about to talk a lot about Eat the Rich, so maybe you shouldn't raise your hand.
Right. You know, even something like swimming. It's like not everyone has a pool, right? It's not easy. You know, golf. Not everyone has a huge tracts of land.
Yep.
Right. I guess I'm using a lot of sports, but you could think about a video game that needs a really powerful PC. Not everyone has a PC powerful enough to play it, right?
Yep.
It's not everything's Doom 1. Some things are Doom 2000, whatever, the new Doom. That takes a lot more GPU power.
And because we live in, late capitalist hell world and all the factors that lead up to that, there are a lot of games that are going to be endangered because only rich people can play them. And when only rich people can play something, one, that thing starts to tune itself to adapt to the sensibilities of that very small community of people, and everyone else is excluded. And that exclusion leads to a lot of problems. Not to get into like economics, but look at airlines. If airlines could get away with it, there wouldn't be coach seats. They don't make money on those. They don't want coach seats. They want business class only. Is that good for society? Definitely not. There's a reason why they're forced to have those coach seats. Mm-hmm. So this is a really interesting one, especially considering what just happened. But some games are threatened by the fact that if they're not widely available, maybe they need an update to run on modern hardware. Maybe they need people to advocate for them. But a company might own the intellectual property rights to that game and might decide that they're going to sue anyone who redistributes that game.
They're not redistributing the game. They let the game die, and they're not selling it. They're not making money off it anymore. It's gone. It's in their past, but they technically still own the rights to it. And so if anyone else tries to bring it back from the dead, they're going to come and attack them with lawsuits and lawyers and bad stuff.
Yep. Case in point, there's that Zelda 2 remake that's out there right now. That game's going to be really hard to preserve in the future. There's that Castlevania one that's at this MAGFest right now. That one is trying to play a tricky game of naming it in such a way to not run afoul of lawyers, but lawyers can go after you even if you are not wrong.
And especially, this is a problem mostly in the United States, but also other countries. It's like, technically, if it's fair use, sure. It's like, okay, but if we sue you, well, now even if you're right and you win in court, you're going to have to pay for lawyers to fight and then eventually win, and it will take years of your life to do that. And it's like, are you going to do all that and win? Can you afford to sacrifice the time and money or just give up and then they win by default even though they may have been wrong?
So if we have a right to repair that we're starting to win that battle for, we almost need a right to rescue properties, games, media, anything that are being held in copyright limbo and not available legally. Destructive evolution, that's Fortnite, but it's also things like Magic. You can play Magic the Gathering today, but it's pretty hard to play Magic the Gathering from the year 1994.
Yeah, where my deck has 4 Black Lotuses, deal with it. Right? It's like, just, it's like, sure, I guess you could print out the cards, you could use like your blood on some paper to make 4 Black Lotuses, but it's like, it's still not the same as playing with the real cards at like a tournament, right? It's like there was an experience that existed at that time, and that experience is gone from the world.
Yep. Counter-Strike, I mentioned it a bunch. Counter-Strike, widely available. It's definitely a near threatened but not a least concerned game. Pretty easy to play Counter-Strike, but which Counter-Strike?
There are several versions of Counter-Strike available. You can play 1.6. You could probably play Counter-Strike Source if you could find some people. You could play the new Counter-Strike 2.
But Counter-Strike Go is gone. Counter-Strike 2 replaced Counter-Strike Go.
Well, there is. I think you could, if you have like in Europe, you can still play it. There's a weird thing temporarily, but it's like if you want to play a specific version of Counter-Strike, if you want to play Counter-Strike Beta 4, good luck, right? It's like just to get that specific code, run it, and get in other people. It's like no, it's not happening.
But this also raises a really important point here. We can't save every animal just by the nature of the universe. We can't save every plant. The goal of this sort of work in both animals and games is not just to save everything full stop. At some point, we have to use our limited resources and decide what to save, to agree on what to save something, or to slow down the destruction of things that are going to die just so that we can learn as much as we can from them while they still exist. We don't really need Counter-Strike Beta 4. Because Counter-Strike 1.6 is what the community of people who cared about Counter-Strike naturally decided was the one to preserve. We keep saying Counter-Strike 1.6. There were versions before and after that. That's just the one that people remembered and cared about and preserved.
Well, they didn't go to 1.7 is why it's 1.6.
Yeah.
There could be a 1.7. They could do that if they wanted to.
That was Counter-Strike Go, the bad one.
Yes.
There are games that you can't play because they're not available to the public.
Right. Not every video game is made for a consumer audience, right? Not every tabletop game is made for a consumer audience. Some people make a game in their home, they play it with their family, and they never tell it. No one else who's not in that family knows about that game, and when that family passes on, if they don't pass the game down to the younger generations, the game will leave the world. Right? There are games we just don't know about. Some companies will make games for their employees to play for training. And if you didn't work at that company, you will never know about that game or play that game. This is Sim Refinery, which Maxis, the company that made SimCity, made this game to help people who were managing oil refineries. It was actually like a corporate targeted game. It was a real thing. You can get this game now only thanks to some people. Right?
Yep.
But in normal circumstances, you would never even know about it.
And it is playable today because of those efforts. I got to play a cool game when I was in elementary school called the U.S. Air Force F-16 Flight Simulator because I was in a program. And I got to play it. I got to play that game. You can only play that game if you live near Selfridge Air National Guard Base and happen to be in a program called Starbase, or if you join the U.S. Air Force. I guess the U.S. Air National Guard.
I'm sure the U.S. Air Force has many, many games like, F-32.
F-18 simulator,
right.
F-15 simulator.
Yeah, you can't play any of those. Nuclear submarine simulator. None of space shuttle simulator, the actual one.
Well,
those games exist at NASA and stuff, and none of us will play them.
Yeah, the games
probably.
the FBI uses, the games the CIA uses to train agents, all these things. If you can imagine a litigious rights holder, the only thing more dangerous than that is a rights holder with 3 letters in their name. Now, some games, they should be preserved for the memory. They should be preserved for the same reasons that He-Man should be preserved. We need to remember it existed, we need to study it, but just as there are many games that you should not bother going back to play because they're bad, don't go back and watch old He-Man. It's way worse than you think it was.
There might be a He-Man fan here, watch out. But yeah, it's like when I was a kid, I loved He-Man. I had He-Man action figures and everything, but it wasn't easy to get access to He-Man after that. If it wasn't on the broadcast TV, I didn't have VHS tapes of He-Man. I had other VHS tapes. So I didn't see He-Man, even though I had these memories of it from my youth, from seeing it on broadcast television. And then when we finally finally the internet came around, I said, wait a minute, the internet. I can see He-Man. I haven't been able to see that.
Oh, no, I can see He-Man.
Oh, no. And then I said, I saw He-Man. Why? Why did I look at He-Man? Why did I like this when I was a single digit in age? Right? So the game still exists. Right? You know, there's some game from your youth that you have nostalgia for. It's your He-Man of games. And then you go back and play it again and you realize this is garbage and now it's ruined for you. Right? So the game itself is preserved, right? But the experience is no longer preserved, not because anything about the game has changed, but because you have changed.
Now, this threatens them because a lot of people might go take an old game and try to preserve it. They have good memories, they care about it, they get into the community, but then they start playing that old game a lot, they realize it's bad, and collectively in preservation, people have to decide where to spend their limited resources. A game that is primarily nostalgically remembered but not actually good is more likely to be dropped on purpose by the people doing preservation.
And if even if you have children play the game today so that they will get that same nostalgia, there's no guarantee that children today will experience it the way you experienced it when you were a child, because children are different and times are different. Or they're the same. You never know.
So what are some examples then of properly endangered games? Games where the red light is flashing, like we are in danger of losing this game forever. Well, I have one. It's called Vampire Tag. Has anyone here played Vampire Tag? Wow, cool.
Okay.
So Vampire Tag, one, if you Google for it, you're going to find that website that has a rule set that's pretty close to the rule set that we knew, but it's not exactly what we knew, and you're not going to find much else. There is almost no literature left online about the game of Vampire Tag.
There wasn't literature to begin with. We learned it from some shady dude at the park.
Yeah, this game was mostly an oral history passed down primarily, as best we can tell, on college campuses in the United States.
One college campus that we were at.
Multiple college campuses. There are comments on our YouTube video of people at other colleges who played Vampire Tag, but they played it wrong with weird rules.
Or we played, according to them, we played it wrong with weird
Exactly.
rules. Yeah.
So Vampire Tag, even worse, this game requires 8 to 12, college kids, people who want to play a game, who are able to run around. It requires some number of foam swords and crosses, like stakes and crosses. You need some accoutrement. You need a deck of cards. And you need one of those old-timey playgrounds made out of wood, the big ones.
The castle style, right? You know the ones I'm talking about if you're old enough, right? And so because Vampire Tag, I'm not going to explain the rules, but basically it's a combination of tag, right?
And vampires.
And werewolf, who's the vampire and who's not. And also, floor is lava. Right? So where you're up on the playground and the wood chips are the lava, right? And so it doesn't matter if you're a vampire or not, you don't want to touch the wood chips.
Yep.
So you need this structure to be able to play the game in that way. And those structures are being lost, right?
Well, they're being actively torn down because the wood that was used to make that whole universe of playgrounds is filled with arsenic.
Now, you can still find some of those playgrounds out and about here and there before they're torn down, but it's like, okay, well, now you need to get a whole bunch of people who are willing to play, and the foam swords, and they'll let you go on the playground at nighttime without arresting you, all right? It's like, it's not easy to play. You could try to make a new structure to play it on, but it won't be the same.
Yeah, I guess we could rent an old mall and build Vampire Tag the game and charge people money to play it, and I think that'd be a great idea, but I don't think it would make enough money.
I guess we could build a whole castle at MAGFest. Starting on Wednesday, we start building it, and then
you could try to.
We need a whole room. Sorry, console, you're gonna have to take a year off. No consoles this year. Vampire Tag instead.
I do think people would be into Vampire Tag. It was a real fun game.
Yeah.
But the last time I tried to play it, the police did show up, because suddenly, we're in this playground at night, a bunch of adults playing a game and making some noise, and it's in the middle of nowhere. There's no way we're disturbing anyone. It was Highland Park in Rochester.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, a bunch of cops roll in, and I think they assume we're all drinking, so they round us all up, except for a couple of our friends who ran off into the woods.
The smart ones.
Yeah, right thing to do. And the police they do not believe that we are just playing tag in the woods. We're trying to explain to them, we're explaining the rules, they do not believe us, they breathalyzed a bunch of us, and eventually they realized, no, we're not drunk, we're just weird. And they didn't arrest us, but they kicked us out of the park anyway, so we couldn't play Vampire Tag. I think Vampire Tag is going to go extinct. When that website goes down and when we're dead, I don't think anyone's going to remember Vampire Tag.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
So, an example of a critically endangered game, a game that is like a heartbeat away from death, would be
The aforementioned Tribes 2.
Tribes 2.
People don't, seems like people in this room do know, but for those of you who don't, Tribes 2 was a big deal, right?
Penny Arcade talked about that game more in their webcomic than they had talked about any one game up to that point.
There are that many, right? I think World of Warcraft or other games, you don't put this up there with the games that everyone knows, like the World of Warcrafts or the Magic Gatherings, right? But yet, there were that many comic strips about Tribes 2 because in that very brief moment where you could play it easily and it was big, it was big. It hit big time, right? And yeah, now it's gone. Bye.
Yep, but this game, not only it was so big, it was the Fortnite of its era for PC gamers. You go to RIT in the year 2001? 2001, 2002, anyone who's not playing Counter-Strike is playing this. It was like this and Counter-Strike, and that's it.
We had to go to the game store to buy it on CD-ROM, and it was sold out, and it was hard to get a copy, and I needed an actual CD-ROM to play it, and a decent internet connection.
This game is like a case study in all the ways the game can disappear from the face of the earth, starting with even the company messed it up.
Right, so what happened is while the game was being played, they kept patching it, which was good. Right? Patches, right? Games being updated, bugs being fixed. But they kept dramatically changing the rules of the game as people complained about various things. And why did they get these complaints? They had a forum built into the game. That forum is also lost, by the way. But they would actually read what people were saying in the forum and listen to them. Counter-Strike had a forum on counter-strike.net. They did not listen to the people in the Counter-Strike forum. They ignored whatever they had to say. All those people who said ban the AWP, it still exists now, and so does Counter-Strike. So don't listen to the people in your forum. Right? Game designers know better than game players most of the time.
Yep, but also a lot of these patches, even if we ignore that whole argument, a lot of the patches destabilized the game. The game would crash, the game wouldn't work, they'd release a patch, then roll it back, release another one. And the fact that the game was so unstable, it ended up being hard to figure out what version is working right now, which started to peel off the player base even when the game was popular. And now, if you want to run this game today, good luck figuring out what version actually worked.
Not to mention the fact that people got so upset with the base rule set that there were just mods, right? And everyone is playing all these wild different mods, and it's well, to be able to play, you have to have the same mod as someone else and want to play that same mod as them. It's no one can agree on what the rules of Tribes 2 are because it was too much modding.
We got to the point to where the majority of all the servers were running mods, so you couldn't even play the real game while the game was still out. So before we did the first version of this panel at PAX West last year, I actually went on an exercise. I went on a journey. I wanted to try to see if I could get Tribes 2 working and get at least 4 people into a game and actually play it.
Now, keep in mind, 4 people into a game is not playing Tribes 2, right? It seems wild today, but actually, Tribes 2 games are enormous, right? This is an FPS where you play on a huge field, right? With bases at either end and several separate buildings. And you have vehicles that you can fly across the field, and you could get 64 plus people in the year 2000 something, right? Maybe even more than that. Tons of people into a single game.
In a game that worked pretty well on a 56K modem.
And these people are organized into 2 teams. It's not like some battle royale where you're winnowing the people down. People are respawning. You constantly have all those people all there.
So I'm going to take you through this journey because I uncovered some terrifying things. So I eventually found a really sad Reddit post where someone is like, hey, I remember this game. I really want to play it. Is there any way to play it? And I know it only has 15 upvotes. But there was one reply that had some links. And it appeared that there was a Tribes 2 community that still existed. So I decided I'm going to dive into this community. I'm going to make this work. So the most tragic thing, I click on that link, and July 1st, 2023, I was writing this panel in August. So, but that means there's hope. There was a recent community. Something was still going on. And I also noticed they only shut down the server, the Tribes 2 server they were playing on. The Discord was still there. So I figured I'm going to go into this Discord. I'm going to talk to these Tribes 2 people and see what I can do. So first I click on the link to try to install the game. And sure enough, there's a website with some files. Now, there's one problem here. There's just an exe file. You've got to download one exe file, install it on your computer from some rando on the internet, and then download a different exe file that will modify that first exe file. Now,
I do not recommend this.
yes, if any of you are IT professionals, that is a terrible idea. But I was committed, so...
Virus.exe.
Yep.
Tribes2pwned.exe.
So let's assume that's not a problem. Let's assume that I'm either insane or I have a sandbox set up, but let's assume I get this file.
I have a computer set aside just to play Tribes 2, and none of my private or important information is on it in any way.
Yep, this computer is ready to be nuked at any moment. So let's assume we get past all that. I'm okay with dodgy.exe. So we get this running, ready to play Tribes, and there's a server browser they've built, and that's it. That is all the servers on Earth that are connected and usable with this exe file. But there's some players there. It's kind of small on this projector, but there are people in those servers at the moment I took that screenshot. So there is some hope, but I look around a little bit more. Most of those players are bots. And even worse, the handful of players, or the handful of servers that have a lot of humans playing them are playing those stupid mods. They got weird mods installed.
So even if you organized some humans and you said, hey, let's go to this server and let's play good old Tribes 2, it's not good old Tribes 2. The actual Tribes 2 game, not here.
So this game was community dependent, it was socially dependent, it depended on central servers, it depended on special technology, it's got every strike against it. And it might feel like, oh, this is a special case. Swap the proper nouns. Everything we just said can apply to a lot of games that are out there today, and someone in 20 years is going to do a panel just like this about, yeah, there used to be this game called Fortnite, and I tried to play it. But then it gets worse. Talked about socially dependent, community dependent. So I'm going to this Discord server, the Discord server for this community, because there's humans, and I think I want to talk to these humans about Tribes 2. Maybe I can get some pull quotes for this panel. Maybe I'll find another server. Like there's clearly
Maybe they have an
people.
organized time that they all play. I can go at that time, and the server will be full.
Yeah.
Not bots.
The Action Quake people have that. Every Friday they have Frag Fridays.
Frag Friday.
I get a
Sounds
Discord.
great.
I get Discord notifications.
That sounds like something we need at MAGFest.
Yeah.
Frag Friday.
So I go into this Discord, and before I click on anything, I see there is a politics channel.
Oh no.
Now, anyone who says that they don't want to engage in politics, they just want to play the game, or like, oh, this is apolitical, one, they're probably a bad person. Everything's political. And people who try to say things are not political are usually doing so in bad faith. But at the same time, you probably shouldn't just have a politics thread in your Tribes 2 Discord server, because there are probably going to be problems in there. So I click on that to see. And it could not have been more perfect, or I guess more anti-perfect. The first post I see instantly after I join is a Trumpy, MAGA, right-wing nutjob who's got some very unfortunate things to say. And as I wait, a few people try to argue with this person, and I see a lot of really right-wing crap. So I go back into the general, and I just post, yeah, what's up with your community? Why is that the first thing I saw? You need to ban that person. They're a poor reflection on your community. And by the way, I am giving a talk on your game at PAX in like a few weeks, so good luck, and I quit the Discord. Multiple people DM me from this Discord, and it's the same story everywhere. I'm not going to put them on blast. No names will be posted ever, but I do have screenshots to archive this. They all made the same argument. Yo, we all hate that guy. Don't let that guy like be the face of our community.
Why don't you ban that guy then?
Yeah, why don't you ban that guy? And basically, socially dependent games actually have a problem I didn't think about until I encountered this situation. If you have a big community, Fortnite, how many millions of people play Fortnite? If there are right-wing nutjobs who play Fortnite, you can avoid them and still play Fortnite. But if there's only like 40 people left on Earth who play a game, if even one of them is a right-wing nutjob, you cannot avoid that person easily. But even worse, even if the other 39 people are good people, if they ban that person, they might be thinking to themselves, I have removed a 40th of the remaining community on Earth. And there's definitely a social dependence where sometimes gamers will tolerate very bad behavior among other people in their gaming circles because it's that or nothing. Because it's the choice of I can't play the game at all. Now, I would say if the game is so small that those toxic people are so prominent, maybe you gotta let the game die. And it's those people's fault. You can't tolerate that kind of behavior.
And this happens the most in the D&D situation, right? It's like there's many factors that go into it, but you have your small little campaign, and even though there's plenty of D&D players on Earth or other RPG players on Earth, you only have 5 in your town. And if one of them is a nut job, right, and you kick them out, now you only have 4.
Yep, and as someone was shouting, and I think because this is the point where you're getting to next, you're reading our minds, I hope. Sometimes those people are keeping the community small. When we were in the RIT Anime Club, there was a job that was never written down, but it was a real job. And the job was someone had to go and distract the fanboy that guys, so they were not bothering the rest of the club so that we wouldn't scare away new members. Now, really, we should have just kicked that guy out, but we didn't know better back then. So if you actively prune even a tiny community, how many people like me will come in, see that guy, and bounce off? If you ban that person, then you might actually attract a bigger community over time. Do not tolerate bad actors if you're trying to preserve a game's community. They will destroy your community. It's like a fungus that's eating everything from the inside.
Yep, you think, oh, if I get rid of that one guy, well, we're losing. That's a huge percentage of our community. But actually, you're not imagining all of the whole army of people that are being kept out because that person is there. They won't come in. They just whoop. They do the old Grandpa Simpson, right?
So what about games? There's a category beyond threatened. Games that are functionally extinct. Animals that are extinct in the wild. That's what EW stands for. Like, there are animals that effectively only exist in zoos and preserves, but they are effectively extinct out in the real world.
Right, so the animal exists. We have a living one. It's not a dodo bird where we only have a skeleton, but you will not see one in any jungle, on any beach, in any ocean. You won't find one. You just have to go to a zoo or some special place where they're taking care of it, and it's being, they're breeding them and whatnot.
This is like that MAGFest museum right over there. Many of you, if you went in there, you probably played a game on a weird console that really you're only ever going to be able to play that game at a museum like that.
Yeah, the museum would be a zoo, right?
Yeah.
It's like a game zoo.
Now, that's not ideal. It's better than nothing, and it does still serve many of our purposes for games. We have to at least make sure games are preserved in the museum setting, even if we can't preserve everything else. Even if the Tribes 2 community can't exist, we need to have a museum exhibit somewhere that explains, here was the deal with Tribes 2. Here's everything we knew about it. If that's the best you can do, you still got to try to do it. But extinct in the wild still doesn't necessarily mean something safe. Museums aren't safe. That computer museum in Ukraine got destroyed by Russian missiles. It's gone. Everything in that museum went from extinct in the wild to extinct in about 20 milliseconds. Let's do a case study. Those Battletech pods. They're effectively extinct in the wild because the wild for these was arcades. You might not have heard of these. This is something only old people have experienced. But there used to be places where there would be physical machines to play video games.
There were just MAGFest in every town.
Yeah.
You had to pay money, the more you played. But it's like, wow, it's just MAGFest every day, all day.
Yeah, just in the mall, like next to the food court. It was amazing. And in those malls, like Battletech pods were just in arcades. You would walk up and just play them.
There weren't that many Battletech pods, but they were out. I went to places that had Battletech pods at the time where they were still a thing.
The last time I played them was at Time Out in Times Square.
There was one in New Rochelle, New York that I went to, and I think there was also a Disney World one I saw. So at least in the 90s, I encountered them at least twice.
So they're extinct in the wild, but we know there are some people curating them because at least before too long ago, MAGFest would periodically have them here, which means there's some person who is preserving them. Sometimes you can find an old game by finding the one person who's got all the kit together and is keeping it alive.
The zookeeper.
Yeah. So they're not at MAGFest anymore. I was hoping they'd be here so I could be like, yeah, they're right downstairs. Go play them right now. But I guess they're not. However,
they could come back, I guess, if that person's still around.
I found 3, and I think there's a few more, companies tiny little like small businesses that have gotten a hold of some of these and are basically running arcades just for the BattleTech pods in like abandoned malls and things around the country.
I think one of them is the person who brought them to MAGFest.
I hope so. I think so.
Yeah.
So they are out there sometimes, and this is our hopeful moment. We've talked a lot about how games can get destroyed, how easy it is for this to disappear. All it takes for many games is one or two dedicated people who care enough to put in the work, and you can save a game. So let's talk about a few extinct games. Games that are actually gone. You cannot play them, and nothing can bring them back. Anyone play a game called Mirai? Mirai got an article recently, and it made the real news too, not just the nerd news. One of PC's most disturbing games, and now it's gone forever. You can go read these articles, go Google for this game. It's a tragic story of how it disappeared, but this game is now unplayable for a bunch of reasons. And it's a relatively recent game, it's gone forever, never seen anything like it. Someone could make a game like it, but they couldn't make it. Ever play Duel? That's a game. Ever kill another person? And it's legal?
Ever get killed by another person?
Anyone
and you're still here somehow?
Anyone got a dueling scar? You ever look at photos of military officers from like the late war, interwar period between World War I and World War II? You might notice a lot of them have scars. They got scars on their cheeks. You want to know why? Because they were dueling. They were playing Duel. I don't think Duel is at MAGFest.
No, do not play Duel. I recommend you never play Duel. It's a good thing that Duel is extinct. I think just knowing about its existence is enough preservation as is needed for Duel. But maybe somewhere on Earth someone's playing Duel. I hope they would stop.
But Duel is a game, and it is extinct.
Good.
What about the ancient games we wouldn't even know about? Not even just the ancient. What about the indie games we don't know about? What if Tarn Adams and his brother, when they were making Dwarf Fortress, what if it hadn't gotten out into the wild and they just gave up? What if someone made an indie game and then died?
There are plenty of other games that aren't so ancient we don't even know existed. You think about the big-time video game companies, your Nintendos and your whatnot and your EAs. They have probably started and canceled without ever releasing to the wild in any shape or form all kinds of games. Probably tons of Marios that no one will ever see because they're just in the vault, and that's the end of it.
Yep.
Right? They're unfinished, but they were games. They were just kind of broken prototype games, but they're there somewhere, and we will never know about them, and we will leave this earth never knowing about them.
And humans have been playing games for a long time. Ancient Rome, ancient Greece, ancient China, all around the earth, North Africa, we keep finding archaeological evidence of things that are best described as game components. Humans like to play games. It's a big part of what we are as a species, but they are lost forever. But that same thing is happening today. Humans keep making games, and one of the things we need to do is just try to cast as broad a brush as possible, to a wide as net as possible, to find the games that are being made and do our best to preserve them. Because if no one finds out they exist, there'll never even be a Wikipedia page. It won't even be the list of 1,000 ROMs, and one of them has a link to nowhere, and if you Google it, you find nothing, but you at least have the name. There are games where there will be no pointer to it forever. So we just spent, oh, my phone locked itself.
Boop. I'll use my phone.
All right, you can run the rest of the panel.
So, it jumped ahead 2 times for some reason. Interesting. So, where did we just take you? Hey, we used our favorite slide. Yeah, there we go. Boop, boop. No, it's only going forwards instead of backwards.
I traditionally use one of those ancient Logitech USB clickers.
This is the first time we've tried using the iPhone.
Yep, Scott wanted to use dual iPhone, and here we go.
Isn't this useful, though?
It is useful.
That's very good, yes. All right, where did we just take you? All right. Nothing lasts forever, right? Keep this in mind. Even the Fortnites of the world, even the most popular possible game, you think it's in the least concern area. Least concern doesn't mean no concern, right? Any game, the game that you're playing, it is mega popular right now, there is concern. Put forth some effort into, at least consider that that game could be gone someday, right? Play an old game.
Now, sometimes play an old game just to get what the experience was, even if it's bad. But sometimes, a lot of people don't watch old movies. A lot of anime fans won't watch an anime that looks old. There's good stuff out there. Watch old movies, read old books, play old games. Outlaw on the Atari 2600 is a fantastic game. If it came out today as an indie game, it would probably do well.
I think the other thing is to play an old game will serve two more purposes. One is that even if the game itself becomes no longer playable, it will be preserved in your memory, right? And at least your memory is still a hard drive that, at least if you don't get amnesia or something, will be a safe backup. You can't like lose all your data in your brain, I guess.
I guess you can.
I guess if you get really old, right? But at least it's pretty safe, right? It's at least for your lifetime, it will be preserved, and you can pass on that memory to someone else by talking or making a web page or a YouTube video, right? And also, if you remember the game, right, and remember its existence, that will help. Maybe even if you're not the person to preserve the game, just the knowledge of it staying in your mind gives it a chance, right? That could be the last remaining seed of that game in the earth, could be your memory of it. And then you put that seed out there, and maybe someone else will grow it.
Just like Counter-Strike 1.6, people talking to people, the things that are worthy for society or important tend to get remembered and preserved. The more you talk about something, your old game that you care about, the more you will put it into the future.
Mm-hmm. The golden age of gaming is this exact moment right now.
Yeah,
right?
Like literally. Think about the golden age of cinema. So many movies that humans have made from the early days of movie making are lost forever. Those film prints burned. There is nothing.
Right.
How many books disappeared forever?
Right. They talk about the golden age of comic books, right? And then the silver age, the bronze age, and like, oh, golden age comic books. It's so hard to get those. They're all rare. But that was considered by some people, for some reasons, the golden age, right? If gaming's golden age is right now, then the things from right now are the things that we don't want to end up like Action Comics #1, where there's only one copy, right? So keep in mind, the things that seem the safest are not safe. Right? Okay. Preserve your own works. If you make something, anything, no matter how meaningless or trivial or whatever, if you don't like it, right, you're the person who can do best to help preserve it. Right? You think the Doom and Quake was our example of the least concerned game. That's because the people who made it open sourced it and put it out there and kept patching it, right, and putting in the work to keep that game alive. They can do it better than anyone else can.
But this is not ego. This is not hubris. Do not be ashamed or afraid to put what you make out there, even if you think it's bad, if you're worried other people won't like it. If other people like it, other people will decide if they will preserve it for you, but they won't even have that chance if you don't give them the opportunity to engage with it in the first place.
If you've locked it up in the vault, well, I guess, you can only last as long as you can keep your vault going.
I'm trying to do a thing, and I've got an initial legal document for it. My hope in my will, because I expect I'll die someday.
And society will still exist.
Yeah. But I want to release into the public domain everything I've ever created that can be released into the public domain upon my death. Every communication, every email, every essay, everything that I have the rights to, I want to be free and available to the world. And hopefully everyone who might have drama from that will be dead by the time I'm dead.
All right. Okay, obviously you cannot preserve every single thing ever. That's like a lost cause, right? As much as, we can try and should try, right? But you're going to have to do some amount of curation, right? Look around and decide for yourself what you value, because what you value is different from what all the other 8 billion whatever people on Earth value, right? And so what you're going to choose to curate and deem worthy of preserving will not be exactly the same, right?
Yep, but here's an example. You apply this to everything. You're voting on what the future will be like. Not everything has to be preserved. I don't need to tell the world 40 years from now about the details of that rando right-wing nut job in the Tribes 2 server. The thing I really need to put forth into the future is, this is what Tribes 2 was like. This is what was important. This is what my monkey brain thought was important about Tribes 2. I hope your future cyber brain can learn something from my monkey brain.
Right, the shape of the future will be what is still existing, right? So you can actually choose, if we can, say, oh, we don't want that game to be part of the world anymore. You could actually make it extinct on purpose if you can try, right? And so the shape of the future will be determined by what things continue to live. Right.
So remember that Quake arcade game that we talked about in the beginning where you all gasped? Well, it turns out it was saved relatively recently. Someone found a copy. There's a YouTube video of play. You can get a hold of this code. You can play it, and there's a functioning machine. So for all the doom and gloom we just talked about, doom. The Quake arcade game is playable, and my call to action to all of you out there is one, if someone has one of those machines, bring it to MAGFest.
Yeah, I can't believe it wasn't at MAGFest. It really needs to be. But second of all, right, if you have a game, right, that is your game that you think is ultra rare and hard to save, and maybe it's, you just can't play it, right? It exists somehow, but you just cannot play this game, either technological reasons, social reasons, any of the reasons we brought up. A, tell us about that game if it's not one that's already widely known. And B, you can be that one person, that zookeeper, right, who's bringing it to MAGFest, right, who's got it in your house, who's got a BattleTech pod collection, that person who brings all the Steel Battalions to PAX, right? You can be that one person to at least take it from the basically almost extinct. You can bring it up one level, right, to the existing captivity level, right, and you should do so, and because I want to play it.
And we're out of time. I hope this was enjoyable.